When she finally met the human who saved her, her words left everyone silent. The chamber of the galactic Concord was designed to impress, but on that day it felt unusually quiet. The ceiling arched high above, made of clear crystal that showed a slow drift of stars. Delegates from dozens of species sat in wide circles, each section shaped to suit different bodies and needs. Soft lights adjusted themselves constantly, changing color and warmth so no one species felt uncomfortable. It was a place where history was often discussed as if it were finished and safely stored away. Ambassador Sarai of the Lithari stood motionless at her station. Her posture was calm, her hands folded the way her people had been taught for centuries. To those watching, she looked as composed as ever. She was known across the Concord as a careful speaker, someone who never wasted words and never showed emotion without purpose. Many believed nothing could surprise her anymore. Then a single word drifted across the chamber. It was spoken casually by a human delegate reviewing an old logistics report from a previous era. Just a name, mentioned in passing, attached to a minor footnote about emergency resource allocation during a long-resolved crisis. Sarai felt her breath catch. No one noticed at first. The chamber was full of quiet sounds, translators humming, data screens shifting, delegates whispering to aides. But inside Sarai's mind, everything went still. The name echoed again and again, pressing against memories she had not allowed herself to revisit in years. The human's name had not appeared in official records for a long time. It was not the name of a general, a scientist, or a celebrated diplomat. It belonged to someone who should have been forgotten, and yet to Sarai it had never faded. She slowly turned her head toward the human delegation. The speaker continued reading, unaware of the effect his words had caused. Sarai studied their faces, searching for recognition, for some sign that they understood the weight of what had just been said. They did not. To them, the name was nothing special. To Sarai, it was the sound of survival. She remembered a different chamber long ago, on a station that no longer existed. It had been smaller, colder, and crowded far beyond its limits. That station had been meant as a temporary shelter during what history now called the displacement event. Systems had failed. Routes had collapsed. Millions had been forced to flee worlds that could no longer support them. At the time, Sarai had not been an ambassador. She had been young, inexperienced, and terrified, though she had learned early how to hide it. Her species valued control, and fear was considered a weakness best managed in silence. The station had been loud with panic. Species argued over space, over supplies, over whose laws mattered when everything else was falling apart. Automated announcements repeated evacuation protocols that no longer made sense. Security units were overwhelmed, and officials focused on numbers rather than faces. Sarai had been just another number. Back in the present, the human delegate finished his report. A few beings nodded. Someone adjusted a data pad. The meeting moved on as if nothing important had happened. Sarai lowered her gaze, forcing herself to breathe slowly. She had spent years building her composure, learning how to stand among powerful beings without trembling. She would not lose that control now, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She could not let that name pass without acknowledgement. When the session reached an open discussion period, Sarai raised one hand. The motion was small, but it drew attention immediately. The Lithari ambassador rarely interrupted proceedings. The chair being of the Concord turned toward her, its many eyes blinking in polite focus. "Ambassador Sarai," the chair said through layered translation tones, "you have the floor." The chamber quieted. Sarai felt the familiar weight of expectation settle over her. She straightened slightly and spoke in measured, simple words, choosing clarity over ceremony. "I request confirmation," she said, "regarding the human individual referenced earlier. The one associated with Station Halcyon's evacuation logistics." The human delegate glanced down at his data pad, then nodded. "Yes, that would be correct. A civilian contractor assigned temporarily to supply coordination." "Is that individual still living?" Sarai asked. The question caused a ripple of surprise. A few delegates shifted in their seats. Why would an ambassador care about the status of a long-irrelevant contractor? The human delegate hesitated, clearly not expecting this turn. "As far as our records show," he said, "yes, retired." No special distinction. Sarai felt something tighten in her chest, followed by a strange sense of relief. "I request," she continued, "a private audience with this human at the earliest opportunity." Silence spread across the chamber, deep and complete. Even the ambient hum seemed to soften. A private audience, not with a government, not with a council, with a single human whose name barely survived in old archives. The chair being tilted its head. "May we ask the purpose of this request, Ambassador?" Sarai paused. She could feel eyes on her from every direction. Curiosity, confusion, even mild concern. This was not how diplomacy usually worked. "I will explain," she said, "in time. For now I only ask that the request be honored." The chair being consulted briefly with its aides. The Conquered valued transparency, but it also respected personal petitions, especially from long-standing members. "So noted," it said at last. "Arrangements will be made." The meeting resumed, but the mood had shifted. Whispers moved through the chamber. Some speculated about hidden political strategies. Others wondered if this was a symbolic gesture meant to reopen old discussions about the displacement event. Sarai remained silent for the rest of the session. Outwardly, she was calm. Inwardly, memories pressed closer. She remembered standing in a long corridor on Station Halcyon, clutching a small data case that contained everything she had been able to save from her home. Around her, beings shouted in languages she did not understand. Lights flickered. The air was too cold for her kind, and she had been shivering, though she tried to hide it. Officials passed her without looking. Drones scanned and moved on. She had not been injured, not important enough to demand attention. Then a human had stopped. He had been carrying a crate, clearly overworked, his uniform marked with the signs of a long shift. He had looked at her, really looked, and frowned slightly. "You're not on the list for this section," he had said, checking his pad. She had tried to explain, but her voice had shaken, and the translation lag had made it worse. She remembered the feeling of being invisible, of knowing she might be pushed aside simply because it was easier. Instead, the human had sighed, set the crate down, and made a decision. "All right," he had said, "we'll fix that." Back in the present, Sarai closed her eyes for just a moment, then opened them again. The stars above the Conquered drifted on, uncaring and distant. History often celebrated the loud moments, the grand actions. But Sarai knew that sometimes the smallest choices shaped everything that came after. And soon, she would finally face the human who had made one of those choices without ever knowing what it meant. The galaxy believed the past was settled. The memory did not come all at once. It returned to Sarai in pieces, slow and careful, like light entering a dark room through a narrow opening. After the meeting ended, she returned to her assigned quarters within the Conquered complex. The walls adjusted to her species, preferred colors, soft and cool, but they did nothing to quiet her thoughts. She stood near the window, watching transport lights move like distant stars. Somewhere in human space, the man from her past was living a quiet life, unaware that his name had just crossed the highest council in the galaxy. That thought felt strange to her, almost unreal. She allowed herself to remember more. Station Halcyon had been built for trade, not crisis. Its corridors were wide but not endless, its storage areas meant for steady movement, not sudden floods of refugees. When the displacement event began, the station became a holding point for thousands who had nowhere else to go. No one planned for that. Everyone reacted instead. Sarai had arrived alone. Her family had been separated during the first wave of evacuations, sent to different routes based on outdated capacity charts. She had been told it would only be for a short time. She believed it, because believing was easier than panic. The station smelled of mixed atmospheres and recycled air. Sounds overlapped in strange ways, alarms mixing with voices and automated announcements. Signs changed languages every few seconds, trying to help everyone and confusing most. She had followed the instructions as best she could. She stood in lines, waited for scans, moved when told, but systems kept failing. Data did not update fast enough. When her turn came, the official terminal flashed an error and locked her out of the queue. "Stand aside," the station official had said without looking at her. "Next." She had tried to explain, but the line behind her was long and patience was short. A security drone hovered closer, not threatening, just firm. She stepped aside, her chest tight. That was when the waiting began. Hours passed, maybe more. Time was difficult to measure. The temperature dropped as power was redirected. She wrapped her arms around herself and focused on staying calm. Lithari training taught control, endurance, and silence. She used all three. People hurried past her, carrying children, equipment, memories packed into small containers. No one stopped. No one had time. Then the human appeared. He did not arrive with importance. He was pushing a floating pallet stacked with ration crates, his hair damp with sweat, his expression tired but focused. He almost passed her by, almost. He slowed, then stopped. He looked back, eyes narrowing slightly, not with suspicion but with concern. "You okay?" he asked. The translator struggled with his casual tone, but the meaning came through clearly enough. Sarai hesitated. Admitting weakness felt wrong, but something in his voice made honesty easier. "I am waiting," she said. "For what?" he asked. She explained as clearly as she could about the error, about being removed from the queue. She expected him to nod and move on. That was what officials usually did. Instead, he frowned. "That's not right," he said. He tapped his wrist pad, scrolling quickly. "You've been here how long?" she told him. His frown deepened. "Yeah, no, that's not happening," he said. He set the pallet aside and gestured for her to follow. She hesitated only a moment before obeying. There was authority in the way he moved, not formal but certain. They walked through side corridors she had not been allowed to enter before. The noise faded slightly. The lights were dimmer, flickering in places. "Name?" he asked as they walked. She gave it. He tried to pronounce it, failed, apologized, and shortened it without asking. The casual way he did it should have annoyed her. Instead, it made her feel strangely seen. "I'm Eli," he said. "I move things from one place to another and try to keep people from falling through the cracks." "Is that your official role?" she asked. He laughed softly. "Not exactly, but someone's got to do it." They reached a small coordination hub. Screens showed cargo routes, shelter assignments, supply levels. Everything was marked urgent. Eli waved her to a seat and handed her a warm drink from a dispenser. She accepted it carefully. The warmth helped more than she expected. "Stay here," he said. "I'll fix the paperwork." He worked quickly, fingers moving over the interface with practiced ease. He muttered to himself, not in anger but concentration. When the system rejected his request, he tried another path. When that failed, he rerouted manually. "This system was not built for compassion," he said quietly. "So we improvise." Sarai watched him, fascinated. He was not breaking rules for glory or reward. He was doing it because leaving her there felt wrong to him. After several minutes, the screen chimed. "There," he said. "Temporary clearance, shelter assignment, and transport window. You're back in." Relief washed through her so strongly that she had to steady herself. She bowed slightly, a gesture of deep gratitude among her people. "Thank you," she said. "You have saved me." Eli shook his head immediately. "No," he said. "I just did my job." "But others did not," she replied. He paused at that, then shrugged. "They were busy happens." He walked her to the shelter area himself, making sure she was settled, making sure she understood the next steps. Before leaving, he handed her a small data slip with updated information. "If anything goes wrong," he said, "find someone like me or find me." She wanted to ask him why he had stopped, why he had noticed her when so many others had not. But the shelter doors opened and the moment passed. They never spoke again after that day. The next phase of evacuation moved quickly. Sarai was transferred to another system, then another. Life continued, reshaped by loss and survival. She studied. She served. She rose through diplomatic ranks, guided by lessons she rarely spoke aloud. Back in the present, Sarai turned away from the window and sat down. The memory left her calm rather than sad. That surprised her. She realized something important. At the time, she believed Eli had saved her life, but now, with years of distance, she understood the truth more clearly. Others might have helped eventually. Systems might have corrected themselves. What Eli had done was smaller and larger at the same time. He had treated her like she mattered when the universe was telling her she did not. That idea had stayed with her through every negotiation, every difficult decision. When others spoke in numbers, she remembered faces. When systems failed, she looked for people. The conquered valued strength, strategy, and foresight. Humanity was known for adaptability and persistence, but Sarai knew there was something else, something harder to measure. Humans noticed. The human did not understand why he had been summoned. Eli sat in a quiet waiting room inside a diplomatic wing he had never imagined entering. The walls were smooth and softly lit, adjusting to his presence with careful precision. A small table held water and a simple chair shaped for human comfort. Everything about the place felt polite, respectful, and slightly unreal. He rubbed his hands together and sighed. When the message had arrived, he thought it was a mistake. The Galactic Concord did not contact retired logistics workers. They contacted officials, experts, people with titles. Eli had none of those anymore. He lived a quiet life on a mid-level habitat, tending a community garden and helping neighbors fix broken systems when asked. His days were simple and he liked them that way. Still, the message had been clear and official. An ambassador had requested a private audience with him by name, by his name. That alone had made his heart beat a little faster. He tried to remember if he had ever met an ambassador before. He could not recall any such meeting. He had moved through many stations during the displacement event, helping where he could, doing his job, filling gaps. Faces blurred together in memory. Crisis did that to people. The door opened with a soft sound. Ambassador Sarai stepped inside. She looked exactly as she had during the Concord session, tall, composed, her movements smooth and deliberate. Her eyes settled on Eli, and for the first time since he arrived, she allowed herself a small pause. Eli stood quickly, unsure of protocol. Hello," he said. "Ambassador." She inclined her head slightly. "Eli," she said, pronouncing his name carefully. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." He blinked. Hearing his name spoken in that calm, clear voice felt strange. "I didn't really feel like I had a choice," he admitted with a faint smile. "That is fair," she replied. "Please sit." They sat across from each other, the small table between them. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable, but it was heavy with expectation. Eli cleared his throat. "So," he said, "I'm guessing you didn't bring me all this way to talk about old cargo routes." "No," Sarai said gently. "I brought you here because of something you did." He frowned slightly. "I did a lot of things," he said, "most of them pretty boring." "On Station Halcyon," she continued, watching his face closely, "during the displacement event, you helped a young Lithari civilian who had been removed from an evacuation queue." His expression shifted, not recognition yet, but curiosity. "That sounds like maybe something I did," he said slowly. "I helped a lot of people who got lost in the system." She nodded. "I was one of them." The words settled between them. Eli leaned back slightly, studying her face. He searched his memory, turning it over gently, like an old tool he had not used in years. "There was a Lithari woman," he said after a moment. "Cold Station. System kept rejecting her clearance." She looked like she was trying very hard not to panic. Sarai's hands tightened slightly in her lap. "That was me," she said. Eli let out a quiet breath. "Huh," he said. "Well, that explains a few things." "What things?" she asked. "Why I couldn't place you," he said with a small smile. "You looked different, more confident." "I learned," she replied. He nodded, accepting that easily. "I'm glad you made it through." "So am I," she said. Another pause followed. Eli shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with the weight she seemed to be placing on the memory. "Ambassador," he said carefully, "if this is about thanking me, you really don't need to. I didn't do anything special." She studied him, her gaze steady. "You still believe that?" "Well," he said, shrugging, "it's true. I saw a problem and fixed it. Anyone could have done the same." "But they did not," she said. He hesitated. "They were busy," he repeated, just as he had years ago. "It was a mess back then. No one had enough time." "That may be true," she said, "but you stopped." Eli looked down at his hands. He did not like being examined this way, as if his actions were something rare or extraordinary. "I didn't stop because it was important," he said. "I stopped because it was right there in front of me." Sarai leaned forward slightly. "That," she said, "is exactly why it mattered." He looked up at her then, confusion clear in his eyes. "I don't understand." She took a slow breath. This part was harder than speaking before the Concord. That had been formal, this was personal. "When my people teach history," she said, "we focus on outcomes, who survived, who failed, which strategies worked. During the displacement event, we studied fleet movements, resource allocations, political decisions." She paused. "We did not study individuals." Eli listened quietly. "For many years," she continued, "I believed my survival was the result of chance and preparation. That I was resilient enough, that systems corrected themselves in time." She met his eyes. "But I was wrong." Eli shook his head gently. "You're giving me too much credit." "No," she said, "I am giving you the correct amount." He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. He sensed that arguing would not change her mind. "You don't remember me because you did not need to," she went on. "That day was only one of many for you. You did not mark it as important." "That's true," he admitted. "I went home tired and sore." "Probably complained about the systems over dinner." She allowed herself a faint smile. For me, that day became a foundation. Eli leaned forward, elbows on his knees. How? She considered her answer carefully. When you helped me, she said, you did not ask what I could offer in return. You did not ask for approval. You did not even ask for thanks. You simply acted. He shrugged. That's just how humans are, most of us anyway. That, she said softly, is what the galaxy misunderstands. Eli raised an eyebrow. We're pretty well known at this point. For adaptability, yes, she agreed. For persistence, for creativity under pressure, but not for what truly sets you apart. And what's that? He asked. You see individuals, she said, even when systems fail. He looked away, uncomfortable again. I think you're romanticizing it. Perhaps, she said, but that belief shaped every choice I made afterward. She told him about her career briefly. How she chose diplomacy over command. How she argued for evacuation corridors that prioritized the vulnerable. How she challenged policies that treated lives as statistics. Each time, she said, I remembered a human who stopped pushing a crate long enough to notice someone standing alone. Eli was quiet for a long time. I never meant to be a lesson, he said finally. I know, she replied. That is why the lesson mattered, he exhaled slowly. So what happens now? She straightened slightly. Now, she said, I will speak before the conquered again. His eyes widened. About me? About humanity, she said. Using you as an example, he grimaced. I didn't agree to be an example, she nodded. You did not agree before either. He almost laughed at that. I won't exaggerate, she assured him. I won't turn you into something you are not. That's good, he said. I wouldn't recognize that person. She stood, signaling the meeting was nearing its end. I wanted you to hear this first, she said, so you would know why I speak. Eli stood as well. I still think you're giving me credit for something anyone could have done, he said. Perhaps, she replied. But history is shaped by what people actually do, not by what they could have done. They stood in silence for a moment longer. Ambassador, Eli said, I'm glad you found your way. So am I, she said. As she turned to leave, Eli felt something settle inside him, not pride. Not fear, just a quiet understanding that small actions could echo farther than anyone expected. The chamber of the galactic conquered was full again, but the mood was different from before. Word had spread quickly that Ambassador Sarai had requested a special address. No official topic had been listed. That alone was enough to draw attention. Delegates settled into their places. Some spoke quietly among themselves, guessing at motives. Others reviewed data, expecting a political statement or a strategic proposal. The human delegation sat together, calm but curious. Eli was not present. That had been Sarai's choice. When the chair being called the chamber to order, the usual background hum faded. Lights adjusted. Translation fields aligned. Ambassador Sarai of the Lithari, the chair being announced. You have requested the floor. Sarai stepped forward. She did not carry notes. Her posture was straight, her expression calm, but there was a weight to her presence that many felt without understanding why. She began without ceremony. I will not speak today of borders, she said, nor of fleets, treaties, or trade routes. I will speak of a moment that history chose to ignore. The chamber stilled. Many cycles ago, she continued, during the displacement event, this body worked tirelessly to preserve civilization. Records show success. Survival rates improved. Systems adapted. She paused, letting the familiar narrative settle. But those records are incomplete. Murmurs moved through the delegates. This was unusual. Challenging historical consensus was not done lightly. I was there, Sarai said. Not as an ambassador, not as a representative. I was a civilian, young, alone, unimportant. The word landed softly but firmly. She described Station Halcyon briefly and clearly. Overcrowding, failing systems, confusion. She did not dramatize it. She did not need to. Many in the chamber remembered similar places. I followed instructions, she said. I waited, I complied. And I was removed from the evacuation process due to an error. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably. Errors were common in crisis, but hearing one spoken aloud like this made it personal. I stood aside, she said. Not injured, not urgent, simply overlooked. She let that sentence sit in the air. Then a human stopped. There it was. The word human carried weight in this chamber for many reasons. Eyes turned subtly toward the human delegation. He was not in command, Sarai said. He held no authority beyond what his actions gave him. He did not consult a committee. He did not ask if helping me was efficient. Her voice remained steady, but something deeper moved beneath it. "He noticed," she said, "and because he noticed, he acted." She explained what he did, not in detail, not with praise, but plainly. He corrected an error. He offered warmth. He treated her as a person instead of a problem. "He did not save my life in the way stories prefer," she said. "There was no dramatic sacrifice. No recorded heroism." She looked slowly around the chamber. "But he saved something else." The room was silent now. "He saved my understanding of what mattered," she said. She spoke of what came after, of survival, yes, but also of choices. Of how that moment followed her into every negotiation, every vote, every disagreement where numbers threatened to erase faces. "When I argued for corridors instead of quotas," she said, "I remembered him. When I resisted policies that wrote off the few for the benefit of the many, I remembered him." Some delegates nodded slowly. Others watched with unreadable expressions. "You see," Sarai continued, "this human did not change the course of history by force or command. He changed it by example." She paused, then spoke the words that would later be repeated across systems. "He did not save my life," she said. "He taught me how lives are saved." Silence fell like a held breath. Even the translators seemed quieter. Sarai let the silence remain. She did not rush to fill it. "When historians speak of the displacement event," she said at last, "they speak of strategy and scale. They rarely speak of choice." She turned slightly, acknowledging the human delegation without isolating them. "Humanity is known for endurance," she said, "for adaptation, for refusing to surrender even when the odds are severe." A few human delegates exchanged glances. "But what truly sets humanity apart," Sarai said, "is not how you survive, it is how you notice." She explained that humans, again and again, had shown a tendency to act locally even when thinking globally, to help the individual in front of them without waiting for permission from the system. "This is inefficient," she said calmly. "It creates inconsistencies. It frustrates centralized planning." A ripple of quiet agreement moved through some sections. "And yet," she said, "it works." She gestured gently, encompassing the chamber, "because civilizations are not preserved by systems alone. They are preserved by people who choose to care when the system does not require it." No one interrupted. Even species known for impatience remained still. "The human I speak of does not seek recognition," she said. "He was uncomfortable even speaking to me about it. He believes truly that anyone could have done what he did." She allowed herself a small, knowing pause. "But history is not shaped by what could have been done," she said. "It is shaped by what was done." The chair being shifted slightly, its many eyes focused on her. "Ambassador," it said carefully, "what is your intent in bringing this before the conquered?" Sarai turned toward it. "My intent," she said, "is correction." She explained that the conquered's records were accurate but incomplete, that their understanding of success needed refinement, that survival without dignity was not true survival. "I propose," she said, "that we amend our principles regarding crisis response." Data screens flickered as aides prepared to record. "Not to add more rules," she clarified, "but to add one reminder." She spoke it slowly, ensuring every translation carried the same meaning. "When systems fail," she said, "individual choice matters, and we must protect the space for that choice to exist." Some delegates leaned forward now. This was no longer a story. This was policy. "I propose that future crisis frameworks include explicit allowances for discretionary aid," she said, "not as an exception but as a recognized necessity." The chamber buzzed quietly. This was radical in its simplicity. "And finally," Sarai said, "I propose that this principle be named." She paused, then shook her head slightly. "Not after the human," she said. "He would not want that." A faint ripple of soft amusement moved through the human delegation. "It will be named for the act," she said. "The act of noticing." She stepped back. "I am finished," she said. For several long seconds no one spoke. Then the chair being rose slightly, a sign of formal acknowledgement. "Your words," it said, "have been heard." Delegates began to speak, not loudly, not in argument, but in reflection. Questions followed, thoughtful ones. Clarifications were requested. No one dismissed her account. No one challenged her sincerity. Among the human delegation, one member sat quietly, hands folded, eyes lowered. He thought of Eli, somewhere far away, tending a garden, unaware that his quiet habit of helping had just reshaped interstellar policy. When the session finally adjourned, the chamber felt different. Not louder, not brighter, but more attentive. The changes did not happen all at once. That was something Sarai understood well. Large systems never turned quickly. They shifted slowly, quietly, often in ways that were not obvious at first. But after her address, something subtle had begun to move within the galactic Concord. Meetings felt different. When crisis simulations were reviewed, delegates asked new questions, not only about capacity and efficiency, but about flexibility. About what happened when plans failed, about who was allowed to decide in the moment. Some resisted. That was expected. Order felt safer than trust. Rules felt stronger than judgment, but Sarai noticed that even those who disagreed no longer dismissed the idea outright. The principle of noticing had entered the conversation. Reports began to arrive from across member systems. Small things, mostly. A transport officer who delayed departure to allow a lost family to board. A supply coordinator who rerouted resources based on what she saw instead of what the system predicted. A medic who stayed longer than required because someone looked like they needed company. None of these actions were dramatic. None made headlines. But together they formed a pattern. Sarai reviewed these reports quietly, often late into her rest cycle. She did not smile often, but when she did, it was genuine. Far from the Concord, Eli's life continued much as it always had. He returned home after his meeting with Sarai feeling unsettled, but not uneasy. The garden plots still needed tending. The irrigation system still failed twice a week. Neighbors still knocked on his door when something broke and they did not know who else to ask. He helped because helping felt natural. One afternoon, as he adjusted a nutrient line, his wrist pad chimed. A message notification flashed, marked with a diplomatic seal. He sighed. When he opened it, he expected another request for clarification, another polite attempt to draw him into something larger than he wanted. Instead, it was short. Ambassador Sarai wished to inform him that the Concord had adopted a new guiding principle for crisis response. She explained it briefly in simple terms. She told him it was already being used. She ended the message with one line. "This exists because of you." Eli stared at the words for a long time. He did not feel proud. He did not feel afraid. Mostly, he felt confused. "That's ridiculous," he muttered to himself. He set the pad down and went back to work. That night, he sat alone on his small balcony, looking out at the curve of the habitat. Lights flickered on and off as people settled into their routines. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. He thought about Station Halcyon, about crates and corridors and systems that refused to cooperate. He thought about a frightened Lithari woman standing quietly, trying not to take up space. He had not thought of that day as important. But maybe importance was not something you felt when it happened. Maybe it came later, carried by others. Weeks passed, then months. Sarai found herself invited to speak at institutions she had never visited before, not to negotiate but to explain, to teach. To answer questions about how one moment could matter more than 1,000 plans. She always told the same story. She never changed it. She never added drama. And she never used Eli's name unless asked directly. When she was asked why, she answered simply. "Because the act matters more than the person," she said, "and because the person never wanted credit." Historians struggled with this. They liked names. They liked timelines and clear causes. A principle based on something as small as noticing felt difficult to record. But over time, they adapted. They began to write about cultural tendencies instead of singular heroes, about patterns of behavior, about the quiet ways humanity influenced interstellar norms. Humanity noticed. That phrase began to appear in academic discussions, not as praise. As observation. Years later, during another crisis far from the core systems, a young delegate found herself overwhelmed. Evacuation numbers did not add up. Routes collapsed faster than they could be rerouted. Her training told her to follow protocol, but protocol was failing. She remembered a lecture she had attended, delivered by a calm Lithari ambassador. "When systems fail," Sarai had said, "look at the person in front of you." The delegate took a breath. She made a choice. She helped someone who was not on her list. The evacuation succeeded. No one recorded her name. Sarai retired from active diplomacy after many cycles of service. Her farewell was quiet. There were no grand ceremonies. She preferred it that way. On her final day, she requested one last meeting, not with the Concord, with Eli. This time, she traveled to him. He was surprised to see her standing outside his modest home, wearing no formal insignia, carrying no aids. "Ambassador," he said, startled. "Sarai," she corrected gently. They sat together in the garden, surrounded by growing things. Eli offered her tea. She accepted. For a while they spoke of ordinary matters, weather systems, food, the strange habits of neighbors. It felt easy. Eventually, Sarai looked at him. "I wanted to thank you," she said. He smiled faintly. "You already did." "In a way that made my life more complicated than I expected." She tilted her head slightly. "And yet you still help." "Of course," he said. "Why wouldn't I?" She studied him, then nodded. "I am leaving the conquered," she said. "But the principle remains. It is being taught now." "Passed on?" "I still don't think I deserve that," he said. She did not argue. Instead, she said, "Perhaps the galaxy needed to learn that heroism does not always announce itself." They sat in silence for a while. Before she left, Sarai placed a small object on the table. A simple marker unadorned, bearing a single phrase in multiple languages. "To notice is to choose." "I did not name it after you," she said, anticipating his reaction. He laughed softly. "Thank you." As her transport departed, Eli returned to his garden. The plants needed water. The work was familiar, grounding. Across the galaxy, ships moved, systems hummed, crises arose and were met. And in small, quiet moments when plans broke and numbers failed, someone stopped. They noticed.